Hey, everybody, it's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Thanks for being with me today. Animal heme, what is it and why do we care? It has deleterious effects for our personal health. Not many people know what it is. Of course, the word animal in front of heme, it comes in animal products, including seafood. Should we find a plant-based replacement? And if so, how? I can't wait to bring on my guest today. We're talking all things algae and plant-based heme from non-GMO sources with Miller Tran today of Triton Algae Innovations. Thanks for being with us, Miller.
Thank you for having me, Elizabeth. I'm really excited about today's topic.
I am too, because algae, people are familiar with that, and they know that algae is having a heyday and that more is being done for, I won't say plant-based protein, because really algae is its own family. We'll talk about
That's
that in a
right.
second. But I do want to talk about animal heme. So I get this from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, the nih.gov. This link will be in meeting notes later, but I just want to set the stage for people so they understand what animal heme is. So high heme intake is associated with increased risks of several cancers, including colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, and lung cancer. Likewise, the evidence for increased risks of type 2 diabetes and coronary heart disease associated with high heme intake is compelling. Furthermore, recent comparative metabolic and molecular studies of lung cancer cells showed that cancer cells require increased intracellular heme biosynthesis, hope I haven't lost you there, folks, and uptake to meet the increased demand for oxygen utilizing hemoproteins. Increased level of hemoproteins in turn lead to intensified oxygen consumption and cellular energy generation, thereby fueling cancer cell progression. That's animal heme found in animals, and yet it's what they say makes meat taste so good. So tell us, Miller, and I'll let you take the stage from here. What are you doing to replace animal heme?
Well, I'd like to say, in terms of heme, absolutely one of the goals of the whole plant-based industry is obviously to get as close to real meat as possible. But, I think the power with plant-based technology is you can really dial it in for nutrition as well, right? You don't necessarily have to have the exact same quantities that you have in animal meat, for example. In terms of heme, I think heme's gotten a lot of attention over the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, of course, with Impossible Foods. The way that Impossible makes their heme is they take a pathway that creates heme, they engineer that into a yeast called Pichia, and then they'll get that yeast to make the heme, and then they'll extract that heme out, a heme protein, I should say, and they add that to their burgers. So for us, in the algae world, one of the things that we realized long ago, and even in the plant world, is that actually most green organisms, most plants and algae actually naturally make heme. And in fact, the precursor to heme is the exact same precursor for chlorophyll. The only difference between heme and chlorophyll is the fact that heme has iron in it and chlorophyll has magnesium in it. So one metal ion. And plants make both. It's just that you never see it because plants are obviously usually vibrantly green, so you don't notice it. And so, at Triton, one of the things we realized is we could use a very natural process to actually get our strains to make our algae heme. And how we do that basically is a natural evolution process. Basically, how plants in the wild, when they're outside in the sun, they get exposed to some UV light, and there's small changes that happens in their genome. And then you can also breed these plants together to create, better plants. That's how we traditionally did agriculture before the advent of all this synthetic biology. So, why do people go the GM route? Well, a lot of people, go the GM route because of the mere fact that usually it gets you to the result faster. At Triton, what we realized is we work with this microbe that has a doubling time that doubles every 8 hours. And so we could actually take advantage of all this older technology, all this breeding technology to get to that result just as fast. And so, with that approach, we were able to isolate out these individual, unique progeny or children of the parental strains, basically, to get strains that were actually red. So we like to claim that we're the first, company in the world to make algae bleed. And we're scaling this technology right now. We obviously have some partners that we talked about in some trade publications. And so, we're working with Tofurky to launch a product in early 2022. So we're really excited about that. But, one thing I want to point out, and what's different between Triton and, say, a company like Impossible or even if you wanted to get animal blood, for example, which I hope you don't. But
Thank you.
yes, but with Impossible, they extract out a single protein. But what we learned at Triton is that when you're dealing with a complex thing like meat and blood, that flavor profile doesn't come from a single highly purified, enriched compound. It comes from the entirety of the heme pathway, right? So there's multiple precursors that are being made that add to that experience that someone has at the very end. And so what Triton provides is a whole ingredient, a wholesale ingredient. So you're, unlike most plant-based products where you have these isolated, say, 10 or 11 ingredients, we're bringing in an ingredient that creates complexity in the user experience that you really just don't get. And so I will say this, everyone who's tried some of our plant-based products is, I think, pleasantly surprised because they have this perception of just what algae is. And when we deliver them the experience that they get here in our own food applications lab, I think they all can see the potential of what we're trying to do.
So we're going to talk about Triton's red algae in just a second. I think that's so fascinating. But I take this right from your website. Triton's green algae is an excellent source of protein and also provides a complete amino acid profile. So I think that's what's interesting is you talk about this complex structure in meat. Yeah. So it's not just the simple taste that we're trying to rectify, but really this complex structure. As well, in Triton's green algae, you'll find it is rich in vitamin A, iron, omega-3, 6, and 9 fatty acids. And then, of course, algae has all this protein. The beauty of the microbe family. And you're seeing lots of businesses talk about mycoproteins either through fungi or through algae or these microbial proteins. Right. But they grow so fast, which is fascinating. And then they have this wonderful nutritional profile. Again, I do want to talk about red algae, but even before we get to that, I'll say, why now? Because in the 70s, algae was a big deal. Spirulina this and spirulina that, but didn't stick. And why now?
Yeah, I think in the 70s, it's kind of interesting. We had that first, what we call agricultural revolution. And what happened there was the yield of crops became tremendous. And one of the things that we actually got really good at with the population boom is breeding these crops for energy or starches and sugars. And so we actually got really bad at breeding these crops for nutrition. But at the time, it was either feed people or don't feed people. And in that instance, we chose to feed people. And so now, here we are in 2020, 50 years later, and we're actually starting to see the same problem that we saw in the 70s, which is we've got a very fast growing world population. And now we've already optimized most of the surfaces on the planet for producing food in 2D. And so now we're having to think about how we're going to feed this, up to 2 to 3 billion more people. And so this is where something like algae can come in, where we can not necessarily replace. I don't think that we're ever going to replace soybean or peas or corn, but I think that we can be a great supplement to get us to fill being a way to fill that gap that we're running into very quickly.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I'll do my best to get this all as accurate as possible. But 71% of the planet is oceans. Of the land left to inhabit for people and to grow food and animals, which is what we really do primarily, to feed those people, you've got 29% left. Of that, 75% of our land is used to make food. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. 50% of our land is used to make food. Of that land, we add a lot to food. 75% is given up to animal agriculture, which is a very inefficient equation because you have to deforest to grow crops, which have protein, they have fiber. Do we use those crops to feed people? No, we give them to animals. You wait, time, water, etc. Very inefficient caloric conversion. So you're giving a chicken about 7 to 9 calories of food to get 1 calorie back from that chicken, and it's like 25 to 35 for cows. So you're talking about really, even back of the napkin kind of math, really bad math. Right. And we don't have the choice of or the luxury of more land and more water as we go to 2 more billion people. So these equations and how we use our resources become really imperative. And this is why algae and microbes are so promising, because they can be so prolific in, create so much in such a short period of time with such a high nutritional profile.
Yeah, absolutely, Elizabeth. And one of the things, we talk about all the time is that, with climate change that's happening, the amount of land that we have is to grow food is actually changing too.
Yes.
And so that's going to be another major problem that no one's talking about. I mean, in Southern California here, I can't remember the last time we had a substantial amount of rain. And so, that's going to cause problems everywhere around the world. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right on all that front. The conversion efficiencies that you get with animals is just not sustainable. One of the things that we obviously in the plant-based industry realize is that people still want that kind of meat experience, or at least the majority of the say vegetarian or vegan people. And so, for development.
All right, everybody. I don't know if it's me or if it's Miller, but we are losing you and you are breaking up, my friend. Okay, you're back. You're back. If there's anything you can do for your internet on your end, you're becoming very fuzzy and you're skipping in and out.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, I see you.
Okay, I see you too. Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think it's kind of interesting. You look at the industry right now, and we're being inundated with a very select few types of plant-based foods, and so we've got a ton of burgers. But most people don't want to eat burgers 7 days a week, 3 meals a day. And so you'll get things that are kind of spin-off of burgers, like sausages. And then, of course, you've got like nuggets and stuff like that. And so I think, what we're hoping to see is this next generation of plant-based products that really appeals to other types of more complex meals, ones that, really endear themselves to people like chefs who can make something that's much more enjoyable to a higher end consumer. And also, to everyday people who maybe just want something nutritious that's not a burger.
Yes, yeah. And, burgers, sausages, even nuggets, these are things that don't really have a structure to them. So,
that's right.
So I want to go to your website and show people, again, we are going to talk about the different colors, everybody, of we'll get to it, I swear, but I want to show people what your product looks like so that people can see that you're actually bringing tuna to the marketplace. Do I have that right?
That's right. We are working on a tuna, and it's pretty much at the point where I know I promised you I would send you some. And
I know.
You will be getting some. I've talked to Dave about making sure we send you some, so that you can actually compare it to what's out there on the market.
Yeah, I would love to. So for those of us who can dive into this visual, for those of you on podcast, so sorry, but you can always go to tritonai.com. We're looking at these tuna flakes, looking exactly like tuna. Very exciting. When will this be on the market? I know you mentioned Tofurky, but is that the first time we'll see it?
It's quarter of this coming year. I don't know what's going on. The first quarter of this.
Okay. Anything you can do to get your internet really solid would help us here.
I'm sorry about that. I have the router right next to me. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so we left you at, is Tofurky going to be the first product on the market with your tuna, or do you have other things coming out just yourself?
Yeah, so our first product will be with Tofurky in early 2022. I can't say exactly what that meat alternative will be, but it will be with Tofurky. And so I think we're planning to make a bigger announcement at the beginning of the year. And so they've asked us to be a little bit more tight-lipped about that.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, as we saw, for everybody looking here on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, you could see the flakes of tuna. When you send me product, will you be sending me tuna, or am I going to be trying something else?
Well, I definitely will get you some tuna product at some point. In addition to that, I'm going to send you some packs of our green algae pasta, which I hope you enjoy, because definitely, pastas are one of the things that we think a lot about, because what we've realized is, while the meat alternatives are very, sexy, what we've learned is that, on a regular basis, it's actually the carbohydrate foods that we eat that are lacking nutrition. And this is where algae can, add, some much needed nutritional benefit while also bringing in some functional benefit to products. And so I think that when you try that, that'll open your eyes to the possibilities of the world of algae.
I love that. So I'm going to be trying your algae through pasta. That is so very exciting. Well, maybe we should get to this like red algae, green algae. What are we talking about here? It's true. When I think of algae, I think of green algae because that's what I see the most. And then when I think of spirulina, which is also a type of algae, if I have that right, I think of blue, but I never think of red.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that confuses people all the time. In fact, we've been working on what we like to call our rainbow palette of algae, because we actually grow our algae via fermentation. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities, because when plants do photosynthesis, they naturally have to be green, right? They absorb light and they reflect green light, and that's kind of what you see. When we decided to do fermentation, what we realized was, because you no longer require the use of photosynthesis, you can actually open up the doors to new possibilities like our red algae. And in fact, we now have yellow algae and white algae, because what we realize is consumers don't always want their products to be green or red. Sometimes they just want to know that there's more nutrition being added. And a great way to do that is to have a nutrition-rich white algae that you can mix in with other things.
Yeah, well, what I love about this is that the consumers love choices. And so as we shift the global food supply system, in fact, I hope people will realize that up until now, our food supply system has been very limited. This is what I realized when I switched over to a plant-based diet. I was like, wait a minute, I was eating the same ham and cheese sandwich every day. It's sort of like a mildly addictive sandwich that I was eating every day. And then I was like, well, hold on, there's all these other things out there. And so when we give consumers choices, they respond positively.
Absolutely. And it's funny because even our food scientists, when we hired them, they were very excited to work with a new ingredient that they hadn't worked with before. If you look at, Beyond Meats and all their competitors, they all use pretty much the same exact ingredients. There's not new ingredients being added to that portfolio of possibilities. And so, for us, we're very excited to, provide this ingredient to anyone who wants it, really, at the end of the day. We've sent our samples all over the world. There's, dozens of companies who are testing out our samples right now. And so we're very interested in, any potential new partners, really.
So let's talk a little bit about this. For you to get algae to everybody, you have to scale up. It's the quintessential problem of plant-based. Oatly, if you look at, today's news, the trouble that they're having getting product everywhere, some production issues, scaling up, it's the big bottleneck for the plant-based industry. You have the ability to scale this non-GMO algae. Is it just simply because the microbe does the work and it grows so quickly? Tell me about your scalability process.
Yeah, I think scalability, one, requires you to build processes that are, one, scalable. And so to do that, you need more than just these small little fermenters, which a lot of companies have. You actually need what we call a pilot facility. And so I think if you look at a company like Upside Foods, who just, announced their completion of their facility, that will help them get to a larger scale. We've also built our own pilot facility here in San Diego. So we've got, 150-liter fermenters that we've, invested in. But I think that even that's not real scale. Real scale is when you get to the millions of liters. And so, we've got now partners in both Asia and in the Midwest. Our partner in Asia just completed a 1.5 million liter facility, which will produce about 5,000 metric tons of algae annually, starting in Q1 of next year. And so we've always understood that your technology. Internet.
Yes, this gosh darn internet. You can fix the world with algae, but you still need the internet. Let's see if you can start that again. So you have a partner in Asia that's doing 1.5 million liters. Did I get that right? Sorry, tell me that again.
Yeah, so they're built. Yeah, so they've a 1.5 million liter facility that's been commissioned. Wow. And
it's not for lack of trying, everybody. We are definitely trying. Okay, so I will fill in a little bit until he gets back. I'm very interested to learn about not just the scalability, but also about waste streams and how there's some potential to upcycle foods. I've been filling in the gaps, Miller, while you were gone. We have you back now. I've been filling in the gaps. I see your face. You're more in focus now. Oh, shoot, you just locked up. Oh, my editor's gonna have a field day with this. Okay. Hey, come back. Well, folks, okay, so I'm very interested in the waste streams that come from algae. It's so much less than the animal waste streams, obviously, that we have in animal agriculture, and how those waste streams can be upcycled to more food. So, again, we're talking about imagining, if you will, the inefficient system that we have now to be much more efficient so that any waste streams will be just piled back into more food. And so this is how we're going to reach feeding 10 billion people. Okay. I'm waiting for Miller to come back. And no, he might try hopping on again. Do you want to get out and get back in? I don't know. Or maybe.
Yeah, let me see if I can.
But I've got you now. Now you're back again. But anyways, we're on the road with Miller Tran. That's what we're doing. In San Diego, we're on the road. It's only an engineer could do it. You see, he's dismantling his entire office. I want to ask a question from Gregory Newkirk. Hi, Gregory. Thanks for watching on LinkedIn. Do you mean using human waste streams for algae production and creating food? No, I didn't mean using human waste streams. What I mean is that, all food production has waste streams. And we'll talk to Miller more about it when he settles down. But as I understand it, and I want to find out more, their waste stream can be recycled and used for other food products. So right now, one of the problems with animal agriculture is also a big waste stream there. So we'll find out. And now no, I'm on my own. So, okay, so we'll find out when he comes back, and he's going to hop back in. But while we're waiting, I'll take anybody else's questions. I hope I answered that, Gregory. It's not going to be human waste. It's going to be the algae waste stream. I will take anybody else's questions if you've got them. And I did see one about moon. Okay. And I like this. Is it possible to have spicy algae producing the same molecules that give spice? I love that. I hope so. I'm going to ask this question like peppers. I think that's very fun. Then I have one here. And this question, I get this question a lot from Bob Coyne. Hi, Bob. Nice to see you here. What about greenhouse gases on the moon? If we could get the carbon dioxide in soil up there, SpaceX, it would be a great way to make oxygen. The moon is 6,000 miles around. What about planet Earth, though? I hate to trash planet Earth and then go somewhere else. So I'm interested in fixing planet Earth, the planet that we've, bombarded and badgered so much. Space is cool. I get that too, but I certainly don't want to give up on planet Earth. So I'm now back with Miller Tran, and he is here, hopefully connected to me. Can you hear me okay? Hello, Miller. Can you hear me? Hey.
Elizabeth, I am so sorry. I don't know what's going on with our internet today, but it is just acting up.
It really is having a little temper tantrum, isn't it? Well, let's see if let's try to at least do our conversation so that we can save the audio for later for the podcast. So let's see if you can maybe take your visual down, maybe requiring less from your internet, and then we can carry on with the audio. Miller, are you still with me? Oh, my word. Yeah, I like Gregory's thought. Maybe you can go without video and we can at least hear you so that we'll have a podcast for later. Okay. Do we have you?
Okay, is that working?
Yeah, we've got that at least. Let's go with that. And meanwhile, I will share the screen with your website. Okay, so let's see if we can pick up sort of where we left off. Oh, hello. Okay. Miller, are you here? Miller, come back. Miller, come back. Okay. Miller, are you? I'm wondering if we should stop because are you coming back or what do you think?
How about now?
I can hear you. Are you?
I'm trying to find some.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Okay, you can hear us. Okay, let's carry on with audio. Oh my word. Okay, well, I know. Tom Vincel says, wow, really good looking products. Yeah, I'm very excited to try this tuna. And then also there are other products coming out by Tofurky this year, which is so very exciting. So, and Tofurky, just a brand that I love. You'll probably know Tofurky as, I'll say, the veteran brand, Tofurky, along with Light Life, along with Follow Your Heart. See, these other brands that started 40 years ago. So I like that iconic Tofurky is going to be working with Triton Algae Innovations, and we're trying to get Triton back online, but at least we have their website, which is great. So I don't know where we are now, but the great thing with Miller, if he's coming back or not. Okay, I'll take him out for a minute and see if he can come back. Yes. So the great thing about algae, of course, is that it doubles in size very quickly. And so you have the ability for prolific quantities to be done really just by the microbes themselves, the algae themselves growing on the right medium. And when he comes back, we're going to talk about exactly what medium they can use to grow. I have another comment from Gregory. I was at Starbucks the other day, and Impossible breakfast sandwich sold out before the sausage. Wow. What do you mean before the sausage? Oh, you mean before the sausage counterpart? Yes. I know. That was very exciting. I'm very, very excited about Starbucks there. Okay, so let's see what we've got. Are you with me?
Yeah, I'm borrowing my CEO's office now. So,
okay.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Well, that's better. Hopefully, picking up where we left off, which is quite an amazing feat. You are producing through a partner about 1.5 liters, 1.5 million liters in Asia of algae. Do I have that right?
That's correct. And that's just the first phase of the facility they built. Yeah. So Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Up to actually 5 million total. And it's one. So we're planning to go to 1.5 million liters total, and 1.5 million liters as a starting point. That's been completed. And our final size of that facility will be about 1 million liters, and that should be completed in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Can you share who the partner is?
I absolutely cannot share who the partner is. Okay. And so I will say that we are about to make a public announcement about that. But yeah, they have completed the facility. And then we also have partners, I think I mentioned, in the Midwest. They've completed their first pilot facility with a couple thousand liter fermenters. And in the next few years, they will also be building, up to the 1 million liter scale.
Wow. So you have a lot going on all at the same time, because you're going to launch Tofurky probably in 2022 early, and then you have some new partner deals. So, one of the things that's nice that maybe people don't know about Triton Algae is that you began in 2013, I think, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Our name historically actually comes from the university here in San Diego, UCSD Tritons. We were a spin out from Steve Mayfield's lab, who's a professor there who runs the California Center for Algae Biotechnology. And so, we had spun out, and we had the idea of doing synthetic biology and making milk proteins. And we were actually, pretty successful at making some of these proteins. And we had thought that we would use them to supplement infant formula. And, at the time, we were testing all these proteins, and we would always use the algae as kind of a control. And then we started noticing some of these beneficial effects when we did some of these studies. And actually, some of this work was actually published recently in a publication with Rob Knight, who's a gut microbiome guru here in San Diego. And so then we started thinking, hey, maybe this is a food. And so then, in about 2016, 2017, we decided to go down that route. And, the reason why now it's 2021, it takes a while to actually go through the whole regulatory process to introduce a new ingredient, which is why most companies don't do it, right? They focus on things that are already foods because it's not a very straightforward path all the time dealing with the different regulatory bodies, not just here in the States, but, in Asia and Europe. There's just a lot to manage there. And it's not cheap. It's very costly.
Well, and I would think Asia would be an open door for you, that there's already a taste profile that appeals to Asians. Would that be correct, or just a guess?
Yeah, I think that is somewhat true in that, of course, algae is historically eaten in a lot of Asian cultures. And so you obviously have sushi that is a macroalgae that's eaten. Korea and Japan both have a history of eating other types of microalgae like chlorella and spirulina. And so definitely there's definitely more consumer awareness around algae products. And so obviously I think we're here in the States trying to make people more aware of what we can do here in the States so that they also start eating more algae because of all of the benefits that it brings to the person who's consuming them, obviously.
Yes, of course. Well, what about waste streams? Because I did see on your website that you're able to be more efficient with your waste streams, or even perhaps upcycle your waste streams. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so one of the biggest problems with how we grow food right now is we tend to over-fertilize fields, and we'll put all this fertilizer into the ground and we'll water it, and not all the nutrients actually end up in the plants. And I think something like just over 20% of the nitrogen we put in the ground actually ends up in the plants. And so what we see in the Gulf of Mexico every year is these giant blooms of algae, actually. And then those algae suck the oxygen out of the water, and then bacteria eat them. It's just a bad ecological process. And so when you do fermentation, you actually design the process from start to finish. So we don't just dump in a random amount of nutrients. We actually design it so that by the end of the fermentation, every bit of the media is consumed. So you're left with basically water at the end, which can then be used again in other fermentation runs.
So you do upcycle the waste stream. The waste stream here you're saying is water. Right. Did I get that right?
That's right. I mean, water is what's left over. I wouldn't even call it a waste, of course, but it's what we can then reuse in future runs. And so there's sometimes residual nutrients, but again, we in the design of our process have made a drastic effort to really make sure that we use every bit of it. Because we understand how the world's also coming into nutrient shortage too. So things like phosphorus and are going to be a problem for us going forward.
Explain that to me, because I'm certainly well aware that when we went through the agricultural revolution, we started producing for quantity, not quality. And now we're suffering from that decision, which of course served us well in the moment. But now we've got a different challenge profile ahead of us. Talk to me about phosphorus, because I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, so phosphorus, the way that we get it is actually we mine it. And phosphorus is one of those things that's essential for life, right? And so it's part of DNA, right? And so without it, you really can't grow anything. And so you've got to be hyper efficient in how you utilize it. And so it's really interesting when you put phosphorus in any microbe bath, it's the first thing that gets consumed by all these microbes because it's so essential for them creating energy. And so I think that, it's one of the things that we pay very close attention to when we're designing our medias.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I was going to ask you about that. What media is it actually that helps the algae grow and be so prolific in a short period of time? I don't know what you can share there. I'm sure there's a lot of IP, but generally, what is the media, if you can?
Yeah. You know what? It's no different than what you would use to grow a plant. It's literally that simple. It's just the matter of how you feed it, when you feed it. That's the trick, actually. And that's where all the trade secrets and IP really lies. Really? It's nothing special. Yeah, there's nothing special to growing algae. It's the simplest form of a photosynthetic organism that you can think of. The one caveat I will say is when you do fermentation, and so most of these companies, you hear this, precision fermentation world, you hear that term thrown around quite a bit these days. Fermentation requires a reduced carbon So that means usually sugar. And so when you think about fermentation, you've really got to think about where that sugar comes from. And so one of the reasons we partnered with a group in the Midwest is because they make a lot of sugar. And in fact, they've become very good at making that sugar because the corn industry supports the alcohol industry. And so they use that, they use that sugar to make a lot of alcohol. But a lot of these companies are, they want to have, to do their part in contributing to a sustainable world. And so they're asking the question, hey, look, we're hyper efficient at making corn, which we then convert to sugar, but we've got all this sugar that we actually want to turn into a higher value product. And so algae just seems to be one of those perfect things where you can take, sugar, which sells for, anywhere from, I think, 40 to 60 cents a kilogram, and convert that into an alternative meat product, which is, obviously a lot more expensive. And so there's a value proposition there for a lot of these old school sugar makers, which I'm sure you've heard of some of them, the Tate & Lyle's, the ADMs, the Cargills of the world. There's just companies that are very, very good at making sugar. And so fermentation affords us an ability to convert that to, I'll say, an alternative meat product.
Yeah, it's fascinating because these basic building blocks of life, as you say, that just the simple food that you would use to feed a plant is really how you're feeding the algae, which I think is so interesting. And you say, well, it's not that hard, but at the same time, when you aren't paying attention to the balance of things, like you mentioned, algae blooms. So a lot of people might be confused, like, well, algae, I thought it was this really good thing. And then I'm seeing algae blooms and why that's bad. And too much of one element then can suck out the other nutrients. So in an algae bloom, all the algae feeding on the oxygen takes too much of the oxygen, and then it becomes a dead zone. I'm grossly paraphrasing here. I'm not the scientist, but that's in general. Okay. I just want people to understand that algae is a good thing, but still it does require a finesse like anything else. So that's Absolutely. Why you're saying like time and the other structures that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think people, and I think we use the term algae very loosely too. There's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of different types of algae in the world. In the same way that some plants are not good for you, but some plants are, and so that's why we work on a very particular strain of algae that is nutritionally beneficial.
Mm-hmm. So now we're back to our yellows and whites and blues and greens and reds, like you're really curating this palette of algae, and then at the same time, the ones that have the most nutritional value, as well as those that can be scaled. And it's sort of like a rainbow of algae at your place. Okay, so I wanted to talk about algae from the environmental standpoint. So we've been talking thus far about the nutritional aspect and the food security, basically, is what we're talking about, getting enough food to enough people by 2050 when we have 10 billion people. And I'll say, you don't have to wait for 2050. We've got food security issues right here. We saw that during COVID.
Absolutely.
But what about algae as a carbon sink? And so by that, I mean algae pulling out the carbon and storing it, either to keep it from being in the air and then giving us climate issues, or just maybe we would reuse that and upcycle that at a later point in time. So talk to me about algae as a carbon sink.
Yeah, absolutely. Algae is, if not, it is probably the best carbon sink in the world. The majority of the oxygen that we breathe comes from algae that live in the ocean, right? There's just literally algae everywhere. And in fact, when you think about how good algae is at, converting, carbon dioxide into just, biomass, there's a reason why, all these coal companies and all these places where they burn fossil fuels are thinking about building algae ponds right there so that they could suck in some of the carbon dioxide that's being produced there. And so I would say that in terms of a carbon sink, it's absolutely something that we as a world have to think about using as a potential way to kind of slow down the amount of CO2 that's going into the atmosphere. So I would say that there are definitely companies that focus on that aspect of algae because of its hyper efficient utilization of CO2. And in fact, it loves having CO2 around. The more CO2 you actually pump into a pond, the better they grow. And so I would say that it's definitely something that a lot of scientists are thinking about, a lot of scientists are working on. And I know that the DOE is actually funding a lot of projects that are algae based to really reduce our carbon footprint.
So I just want to simplify this down for people. Not only is algae a carbon sink, but it is also reverse carbon, in that it's sucking carbon dioxide from the air and it's putting out oxygen. Do I have that right? So please.
Yeah, it is if you do it photosynthetically. And so I will say, if it's growing photosynthetically, that's absolutely true. When you do fermentation, you do produce a little bit of carbon dioxide. It's obviously less than when you grow an animal, of course, but I would say that, algae has that flexibility as an organism where it can do either or, which is kind of the power of the organism, because it has such a diverse biochemistry that's, in my opinion, underutilized still to this day. And, we're just starting to see all these crops of young scientists that kind of grew up in the biofuels era who are now applying all their learnings to, helping with climate change and obviously helping to produce the next generation of foods too.
Isn't that funny? Because someone who was working in biofuels reached out to me about 3 weeks ago and talked to me about algae and how they're really using the technology that they learned in the biofuel industry and now applying it to algae. So I think we're going to hear so much more from algae. This is such a burgeoning area, and it really is. We always talk about like the future of food, but this is something that is so cost efficient and so prolific. It would be naive to think that it's not going to play a major role in the future, I think.
Absolutely. And every country is working on it. We've got players in Asia, all over Asia, really, in Europe, and here in the States. There's just a ton of companies that are kind of just coming out of nowhere that are going to have an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, speaking about how the world is changing and all these companies coming to the forefront who want to have an impact, what are your predictions moving forward? Let's say, I used to ask this question on the show, like the next 10 years, but now things are changing so quickly. I say the next 3 to 5 years. What are your predictions? It can be specific to algae, or it can be to the food supply in general.
Yeah, I think the food supply is going to become a lot more diverse, which is kind of the exciting thing. We work on regulatory all the time with the United States FDA. And one of the things we've learned is there's a giant backlog of companies trying to put new ingredients into what's called the GRAS inventory, the generally recognized as safe inventory, where the FDA will look through your data and say they have no questions, it's safe to eat. And that backlog is getting bigger and bigger, and they're trying their best to keep up, bless their hearts. But what we can tell from our end, at least, is that there's a lot of new ingredients on the horizon, which means there's going to be a plethora of new things that we can eat. It won't just be burgers in the future, right? I think fungus, obviously you mentioned already, is coming on, and is coming on quickly. And so I think I'm excited by all these companies that are, have the backing, one, to actually go through that process, because it's not cheap, but two, that have the kind of guts to actually pull that off, because, anytime you take a new ingredient, there's a risk there, because you don't know if it's safe, and you've got to do all the tests to make sure that it is.
Yeah, I think it's a very exciting time. There is this backlog, but I think 2-3 years out, the grocery store is just going to look so different. The products that are there on the aisles are just going to have so much more choice. There's going to be ingredients, I think, are going to play the star role on front of pack. People are going to want to know not just is it organic, et cetera, but, is it ancient grains quinoa, or is it, organic chickpea, or all these things I think are coming to the forefront. Do you foresee any trouble communicating to the general public the benefits of algae?
Absolutely. In fact,
Okay.
People like you are, some of the people we love the most, let's be real, because you help communicate that message, because as scientists, we like to nerd out, and oftentimes nerding out just confuses people. And so I think, people like yourself, you do a fantastic job of communicating to the general public what exactly we mean. And, even when my internet goes out for 10 minutes, you could keep going and describe what you know about us.
Very funny. Yes. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, it's a juggling act for sure. But so right now, I think the consumer would say algae, it's going to taste really fishy, and it's something I feed my fish. Or it's something, I don't even know if they realize it might already be in sushi and they're already eating it. What is the taste profile that you have to overcome?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That is something that we focused on here at Triton quite a bit. And so we don't just take the algae for what it is. What we understand is the outcome of what you do is dictated by two things, and two things only. One, it's the genetics. So if you can control the genetics, that's great. That's what we do in agriculture. We have these seed companies that can control the genetics, but they can't control the environment. And so they're kind of at the mercy of if it rains or if there's a drought, whatever it is. We control the environment. So when you control the genetics and the environment, you control the outcome. And so we are masters at controlling both. And so we really try to dial both in so that we can get unique outcomes. We do have algae that do taste fishy because they have omega oils, but we've also, really tried really hard to evolve strains that no longer have that. And in fact, we've been passing our food scientist trains where they'll say something that's great to us, which maybe it doesn't seem like it would be great for food, but they say, hey, this is flavorless. We're like, perfect. Because then you can get the nutrition without the flavor, because flavor is the first thing that consumers taste, and you really don't want to have an off-putting flavor.
Yeah, we have a wonderful question here from Frank Fields. What are the greatest threats and weaknesses facing this industry? I'd love you to answer that.
Yeah, I think the biggest threat to me I see is these companies with monstrous valuations, but no products on the horizon. Because when you get a lot of companies that don't, that sell wild dreams, that don't get to that end goal, it dries up the funding that's available for these companies that are still growing, that need time to mature into profitable businesses. And so I think, managing expectations is something that we try to do here pretty regularly at Triton. We try to underpromise and then overdeliver on products. And then I think, the other thing I would say is people starting to try to carve out their own space and not being synergistic in the ways they work with other companies. When we started in the future food tech industry, we had to decide if we wanted to go it ourselves. But one of the things we realized is, for example, and Tofurky is the perfect example, there's companies that have established supply chains that, are in grocery stores that have shelf space. Together we could be more powerful than both companies by themselves. And if we're really sincere about, having an impact today, we can't turn our backs towards those possible collaborations and just say it's only us who can do it. There's, both these companies bring something to the table. If we can just figure that out, I think that's a powerful thing to do. And I hope that more companies take that approach.
Sure. When you leverage other partnerships, you get the benefit of all the work that they've already done, and you can add it to your own. I know there are ingredient companies like Ingredion already doing that kind of partnership mentality with Notco and the Every Company, and just seeing that it's beneficial for the bottom line, really is what it comes down to. We talked about you being in existence since 2013, and you have these product lines and partnerships coming out that really are going to make more headlines in 2022 because you've just finished a very successful raise. Do you foresee an IPO for you ever?
That's a great question. I think, obviously we have investors who obviously would like a return on their investment, but we also have investors who, it was kind of interesting. One of our investors who approached us at a conference, asked us if we were looking for money, and I told him no. And he was like, what do you mean everyone's looking for money? And, I didn't realize he was a really rich individual at the time. I thought he was just some random Joe Schmo. And I just said, I just said what I honestly felt, which was, look, we're looking for people who share our vision of a more sustainable food ecosystem. And so, we've got investors like that who just tell us, hey, just keep fighting the good fight. So it's, been a blessing for us, I have to say. And so in terms of an IPO, it's kind of an interesting thought. I think, there's when you IPO, there's a lot of expectations. And I think, Beyond Meats is a perfect example of that, where, you have revenue growth, but it wasn't big enough. And so you start having to please the financial markets. And so, which I get. And I think that, that's something important to consider. But I think that, then you have companies like Impossible Foods who want to get to their point in time where I think that they feel ready for that IPO. And so, both tracks are feasible tracks. I think for us, we debate that all the time. And so it's something that we think about, right? Because it's just a matter of making sure the company's financed properly to accomplish the goals that we set out to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to be ready. This is no small undertaking, and I think people can get easily swept away by the press.
Right.
Around it, and then make a mistake of going to market too fast, or even at valuation that may or may not be there. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm just saying that there are some fundamentals to consider, even though the press is so exciting and it's such a sexy opportunity. But you can't let that drive really at the stage that the company's ready to go to market. So, and I also think there's for some of the companies that have gone to market already, there's been a backlash of those who just weren't ready to accept this, which will happen and is an inevitable, a global shifting food supply system. And so that secular trend, we're just barely a hair's breadth from the tip of the iceberg of what that's going to look like. But I think soon people will get into the public markets just because there's so much money to be made here. You look at other secular trends like digitization and obviously, that's been a very successful run for a lot of people. And food will be the same when we make that switch. Well, okay, as our time winds down here, a couple sort of personal questions. I'm wondering if you have any legacy ideas for yourself and what you'd like to be known for.
I tell everyone this, and I tell everyone in my company this. I just want to know that we made a difference, and that's it. It's so funny. People ask me, well, are you going to get rich as someone who's a founder of the company? And I've told my employees as much that if we are that wildly successful, I'd happily give a good portion of my shares to them, because at the end of the day, it's not about me living a lavish lifestyle. In fact, I still drive my old car that's 8 years old. I just, I'm just very frugal in that sense. But it's about building something that our children can grab onto and grow. And I think the younger generations, we see that quite a bit now. The Gen Zs, I think they're known as the mission-driven generation, and I just get a thrill every day coming to work and working with individuals who are very motivated to make a difference. And so I think I'd like to continue that. I'd like to be someone who can be a mentor, obviously, to younger people, and hopefully we can continue to do good things here at Triton.
Well, I'll bring up Tofurky again because Seth Tibbett, the founder of Tofurky, says that for those who are mission aligned, he's speaking about the vegan plant-based community, but I think it applies to others. When you are mission aligned, it is your kryptonite. It is your secret weapon because it's hard to be an entrepreneur. You, of course, know that, having been in the biz for 8 years. It's going on 9. It is a hard road. And when you're mission driven, it's not the money that's driving. It's really that sense of making a difference. And it does end up being your secret weapon. As you forge ahead, I'm wondering what you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now.
I wish I knew that business is a lot harder than research and development. Because let me tell you, I've had to learn that when I was younger, I was always very impulsive in things that I did and things that I said. I think as I've gotten older, I've learned that you learn to be someone who plans, but then also I think more importantly, learn to be someone who can adapt their plan. Because I think when we first started Triton, we had an idea of what the company should be, and we stuck with that for years longer than we should have, and that almost brought us to the breaking point. And so I think once we learned what we were and how to adapt quicker, I think that saying, that old adage of fail fast, really holds true. And I wish I could have adapted that sooner because, coming from an academic background, I did my PhD at UCSD. You always want to do things perfect. And I think it was Sheryl Sandberg who said, don't let perfect be the enemy of done.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I like that a lot. I always say that for those who are successful, it's not really the smartest or the best connected or the prettiest or the funniest or what have you, or even the wealthiest. It's those who can make their money last the longest, those who are willing to work the hardest, and those who can pivot the fastest. That doesn't mean pivoting every time, of course, then you're just dancing with yourself, going round and round. Right. But sometimes you have to pivot. And when you realize that it's important to pivot, if you can pivot fast, so you're nimble, that's very helpful. Okay, we truly are winding up here now. Thank you for your patience as we worked through some of our tech glitches. Okay, so you're running around, you're having a bad day. Many people have had many of them during COVID. Is there a phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
It's funny. I know this sounds weird, and this is more maybe sounds like locker room here. But one of the things I tell my team all the time. When things are going bad, I look them in the eye and I say, "Winners win." And what I mean by that, and I know that sounds weird, but my old mentor at UCSD used to tell me something, and he said, people become what they know they'll become, not what they believe they'll become. And it took me a long time to understand that. And, at least I think I understand it now, which is when people know that they're somewhere they have to be, and they just don't stop until they get there. And that's the winner's mentality. They just keep going longer, and then the person who lost is willing to go. And so I like to remind them that winners win.
I see. So you'll get there. Just don't lose sight of that goal. You will get there.
That's right.
Okay. Winners win. I love that. Okay. Sort of another really fast one on our way out. You're running around super busy. You don't have time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
My go-to snack, you're gonna laugh, but it's just these Costco protein bars. So like, yeah, it's just, and the only reason for this is because my colleague stocks them, and he's always willing to offer me one. so
So that's easy. Yeah. Someone
yeah,
else
that's
even
right.
bought them. Yeah, that's great.
That's right. He's a very loving man. I love him. And so, yeah, he's been very supportive of our growth and my growth here at Triton.
That's so wonderful. Well, okay. So a couple things have come out of this. You owe me samples. I hope we've made that clear in this invitation, in this interview. And
that's right.
When I'm in San Diego, I'll come find you. I don't know if I'm allowed to get a tour, but I sure would love one. So
you are absolutely welcome to come have a tour. We've had many a tours, and we'll have a food tasting ready to go. Our food scientists, will make you a full-blown algae meal. We've done that multiple times for our guests, and so if you're ever in town, we'd love to have you. We're just commissioning our giant food applications lab right now, and so that'll be up and running here in the next month. So we'd love to have you, and I will definitely get you those samples. And one last thing came out of this, which is I need a new internet provider.
Yes. Well, maybe that's true. So maybe we'll have to do another Plant-Based Business Hour live from a food tasting Triton Algae Innovations in San Diego. I want to thank you for being with me. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for being mission aligned and seeing on so many fronts how you can make a difference. We all have a skill set, but if we use that skill set to make a difference, you really will see change. And you're doing that on so many levels, animals out of the food supply chain, food security, and just better nutrition, which is really what we're after. So Miller, thank you for being here. You don't go away. Everybody else on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, thanks for all you do as well. And I will see you next Tuesday. Bye, everybody.